You can call me Dr. Yasin. This story is inspired by true events. It's told with deep respect for all faiths and meant only to share one man's journey toward finding peace in Islam. From which country are you watching this video? Subscribe to this channel if you love Islam. I used to believe certainty was something you could stitch into a person like a sutured wound, precise, final, neat. In medical school, they taught us to master the algorithm. Symptoms, labs, diagnosis, intervention. Life pressed itself into flowcharts, and I thought my soul could too. I told myself that if I answered enough questions with the correct words, the quiet ache beneath them would resolve on its own. For years, I was a man of bright hallways and clipped sentences. I wore white like a flag of conquest. I spoke quickly, slept little, and learned how to fold grief into data, sodium levels, ejection fractions, measurable things. On rounds I could taste the metallic tang of disinfectant in the back of my throat, and I liked it. It meant everything was clean, controlled, predictable. But there are days that resist labels. There was a patient, let's call her Mira, who taught me that. She was young, younger than I was by a decade, and the kind of patient whose chart makes you straighten your spine. The kind of case where you want your hands to be steady, because words won't be enough when the family's eyes start searching your face for the shape of hope. We did everything right. Rechecked the scans, cross-referenced the labs, ordered the second opinion and then a third to be sure. I stood in the fluorescent hush of the corridor at 2 a.m., listening to the ventilator measure time and size. I whispered to the ceiling tiles that I was not afraid, that I could outrun whatever story was already writing itself in her blood. She died anyway. And I hated the silence that followed. It wasn't an ordinary silence. It wasn't the kind you find at the end of a long day, like a room you can turn the lights off in. This silence opened into something cavernous, made of questions that wouldn't fit in my chest. People assume physicians acquire a callus where grief used to be. Maybe some do. Mine never formed. I left the hospital after signing the forms and stepped into a night so still I could hear the tiny clicks my car made as it cooled down. The city looked like it had been carefully placed there only moments before, streetlights like pinned stars, asphalt dark and gleaming, a stray cat concluding its private rounds. I sat behind the wheel, hands on the leather like it could teach me how to hold something without breaking it. What is a life? I found myself saying aloud, if not more than its numbers. I had asked similar questions in ethics seminars. They were sterile, then scored debates, academic rehearsals. But now the words came heavy, damp, like coats on a winter hook. I didn't have a religion. I had a schedule. I had the reflex to respond to pain with a plan, yet the plan kept stumbling over a boundary I couldn't map. Every answer I reached for threw a shadow shaped like another question. What does healing mean if not every wound closes? Where does mercy begin when skill ends? To cope, I built rituals that looked like control. I double-checked doors, triple-checked charts, counted stair steps like a monk cloistered in a stairwell. I learned to predict the coffee machine's rhythm and took comfort in its consistency. And still, in the quieter pockets of the day, my heart would pull at me a small, persistent tug towards something I couldn't name. It was during one of those pockets late afternoon, hospital cafeteria, lukewarm tea going thin on my tongue that I heard it. A. Sound like a tide moving across stone. It was the call to prayer from a small masjid a few streets over, drifting through the sliding doors each time someone came in or went out. I had heard it before in movies and travel clips, but never like this, never as a breathy thread stitched into the fabric of a shift. I wouldn't romanticize it now, as if an invisible hand turned my face and I suddenly understood. I didn't. I simply paused, spoon in midair, as the vowels poured themselves out with an assurance that startled me. The announcement was not a sale, not a breaking news alert, not a demand. It was an invitation. For the next week, I timed my breaks to those sounds, without admitting that's what I was doing. I told myself I liked the walk, the way autumn light slanted through the maple trees by the staff parking lot. I let the call to prayer gather in the spaces I usually filled with podcasts and updates. On Friday, the hospital quieted the way hospitals do, half-rested, not asleep, one ear open. I finished dictating notes and found myself standing outside the masjid. I stayed on the sidewalk. The door was unremarkable, painted a worn blue that reminded me of a childhood bedroom. A man was sweeping just inside, and when he saw me hover, he smiled like he recognized a hunger I hadn't named. I didn't go in. I wasn't ready. But that night, home felt like a coat I'd outgrown. I moved from room to room, kitchen, living room, study, touching the corners, straightening frames, listening to the quiet as if it might answer me back. I had colleagues who found solace in running, in wine, in weekends melted into new cities. I tried each remedy like a patient following discharge instructions. By Sunday evening, I was more exhausted than before, the cure lodged in the throat of the disease. A memory surfaced, my grandmother's, porch during summer rains. I remembered how she would close her eyes and whisper something when the storm crept close. She wasn't Muslim. She was a woman whose prayers were stitched from ordinary thread, gratitude for rain, safety for the sparrows, patience for the garden. She taught me reverence for the small. So I practiced a simple experiment. I placed my palms on my knees, sat on the edge of my bed, and breathed in the way I asked anxious patients to breathe slowly, deeply, until the breath warmed my ribs. I said what I did not know how to say. If you are there, and if there is a way to live that doesn't come undone when the world does show me. The sentence left my mouth like a bird unsure of its wings. Nothing miraculous happened. The walls did not tremble, but the room felt wider. It was enough to try again the next night. In the days that followed, the world rearranged itself by a few degrees. I noticed the kindness of a nurse who tucked a blanket all the way up to a patient's chin, the way a janitor hummed to remind his hands they were more than their task. I noticed the way fear shrank when I named it, and the way gratitude doubled when I did the same. One afternoon, I saw a stack of paperbacks on the staff lounge table, free for anyone, the cover of one stamped with a simple crescent. I picked it up as if it might burn me, an English translation of the Quran, with commentary for beginners. The spine cracked softly when I opened it, a sound like a door politely clearing its throat. I read slowly at first, suspicious of my own curiosity. But the words didn't crowd me. They met me where I was fearful, hopeful, stubborn. There was a cadence in them that did not hurry me along, lines like mercy upon mercy, patience in the unseen, the possibility that gratitude is a way of looking, that finds a path even in mocking the dark. I was surprised by how practical it felt. Not a manifesto shouting from a hilltop, but a steady hand extended like a railing on a staircase. Put the next foot down, it seemed to say. Then the next. I didn't tell anyone. I carried the book in my bag under case files and discharge summaries. like a secret I wasn't ready to test in daylight. When I paused between consults, I'd read a page and let a single phrase sit on my tongue the way I used to hold difficult facts before breaking them to a family. I remember a night in the ICU when, for no reason I could articulate, I felt an urge to stand quietly, to turn my palms upward the way one does when they have nothing left to grip. I didn't know the prayers, only the posture. The room hummed with machines. A monitor traced a fragile rhythm in green. And there, almost beneath hearing, I felt a kind of answering, like the hush that follows when you finally stop interrupting someone who has been waiting to speak. My certainty began to loosen, not like a rope snapping, but like a knot gently worked by patient fingers. I saw how my mind had been trained to love control and call it wisdom. I saw how pain had stalked me, not because I was weak, but because I believed I had to wrestle it alone. I went back to the masjid. This time I stepped inside. The carpet was soft beneath my soles, softer than I expected, like standing on the memory of grass. A few men were seated, quiet, reading. No one watched me like a specimen. No one demanded a declaration. Someone pressed a date into my hand and said, "Welcome." I didn't know what I was doing. I sat near the back and listened. There was no performance, no spotlight, just a hush that felt intelligent, a silence careful with its own edges. When the call to prayer rose again, I understood why it had followed me all. Not to conquer me, but to collect me. Afterward, an older man with eyes like polished walnut asked my name. I told him I was only visiting. He smiled gently. "Many of us were only visiting at first," he said. He offered me a short booklet, The Basics of Prayer, and a place to sit anytime I wanted to breathe on purpose. I walked home under a sky burnished by late sun. The city sounded different, not quieter, not louder, but tuned. The cafe chatter, the bus braking at the curb, even my footsteps, all of it layered like a song I had heard since childhood without ever paying attention to the melody. At my apartment, I placed the booklet on my table alongside my stethoscope and keys, instruments of different work. I boiled water for tea, the kettle's small crescendo shaking the steam free. I understood very little of Arabic, of jurisprudence, of how a life might look when lived in prayer. But I understood that I had been invited to breathe in a room with windows I had not known could open. I am still the man who cares about sodium levels and ejection fractions. I am still the physician who believes in measuring what can be measured. But something in me has learned to bow, not in defeat, but in alignment. The knot does not resist as fiercely. The grief does not spill without a bowl to hold it. That night, I tried to pray. Not well, not fluently. I whispered what I remembered from the booklet, stumbled over syllables, and let my forehead find the floor. The carpet smelled faintly of clean cotton and something warm like sunshine saved from earlier. I told the one who hears that I did not yet know how to be a man who trusts, only a man who asks. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of work, not because of fatigue, but because something in me had shifted so quietly that I couldn't tell if it was fear or peace. I lay on my back staring at the ceiling fan, its blades cutting through the air with a steady rhythm, and I realized that for the first time in years, my mind wasn't racing through the next day's tasks. It was listening. Listening for something I didn't yet have words for. The next morning, I opened the small booklet the old man had given me, The Basics of Prayer. The pages smelled faintly of ink and dust. the kind of smell that belongs to books that have comforted many hands before yours. Inside, there were diagrams, the movements of prayer, and transliterations of Arabic words I could barely pronounce. But I wasn't reading it like a manual. I was reading it like a heartbeat. The first verse I tried to learn was Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. I must have whispered it 100 times that morning, the syllables stumbling over my tongue, the meaning unfolding slowly, like dawn. Each repetition loosened something in me. Each breath after it felt softer, less owned. It was strange as a doctor. I had spent my life naming everything: diseases, diagnoses, syndromes, the architecture of the human body. But this simple phrase named something that had been living unnamed in my chest for years. I practiced quietly before work, between patients, even in the elevator when no one else was there. Sometimes my voice shook, sometimes I forgot a word, but the peace that followed it lingered longer than caffeine ever did. That week, I was assigned to a palliative case, an older man nearing the end of his battle with heart failure. He was calm in a way that made the machines around him feel unnecessary. I'd check his vitals, listen to his breathing, and he'd smile faintly and ask, "Doctor, have you prayed today?" I didn't know how to answer. He wasn't trying to convert me or preach. It was more like he was reminding me of something I'd forgotten to do, the way you might remind someone to drink water. One afternoon, when the ward was quiet, I sat beside him and asked, "Does it really help? Prayer, I mean?" He looked at me with eyes that carried decades, eyes that had seen loss, laughter, mercy, and fear, and said, "When you talk to the one who made your heart, even the things medicine can't fix start to hurt less." That night, I tried again. I stood in my small apartment, booklet open on the floor, my phone softly glowing with a video of someone reciting Al-Fatiha. I followed each word like a trembling child learning to speak for the first time. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All praise is due to Allah, Lord of the worlds. The words felt heavy, but not burdensome like rain pressing gently on dry soil. When I reached the end, I sat down and cried. Not out of sadness, not even out of guilt, but because for once, the tears didn't feel like failure. They felt like cleansing. In the hospital, I began to notice things differently. A patient's gratitude, even in pain. The quiet discipline of nurses who worked double shifts and still smiled. The way every breath, even labored, was a mercy in motion. It's strange how faith rewires the senses. The same corridor I used to dread felt lighter, as if the walls had been praying all along and I had just learned how to listen. One day, after losing another patient, a young mother, I went to the stairwell. Usually, I would sit there in silence, numb, but this time I whispered, "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un." To Allah we belong, and to Him we shall return. The words carried weight, yes, but also release. It was not despair. It was surrender, not of effort, but of ownership. I realized then that belief didn't mean abandoning reason. It meant understanding its limits. My hands could heal, but only by His permission. My skill could prolong a heartbeat, but not promise one. Weeks passed. I found myself craving the prayer more than rest. I would finish a long shift, walk past the masjid, and feel a pull I couldn't ignore. One evening, I finally entered during Maghrib, the sunset prayer. The air was warm with the scent of musk and humility. A row of men stood shoulder to shoulder, no one ahead, no one behind. The imam's voice rose, calm and commanding, reciting verses that carried both gravity and gentleness. I stood at the back, unsure, mimicking the movements as best I could. My knees shook as I bowed. When I placed my forehead to the ground, the world, with all its noise and ache, disappeared. There, in that small act of lowering myself, I felt higher than I had ever been. It was the first time I understood that peace is not the absence of chaos, it's the presence of surrender. When the prayer ended, an older man turned to me and smiled. "Your first time?" he asked. I nodded, embarrassed. He chuckled softly. Then, "Welcome home." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about that phrase, "welcome home," because home wasn't a place anymore. It was a feeling, a quiet inside me, that no hospital, no achievement, no applause had ever built. I wasn't a Muslim yet. I was still learning, still hesitant, still caught between two languages, the language of science and the language of surrender. But the more I learned, the more I realized they weren't enemies. Both sought truth, one through evidence, the other through faith. And sometimes, truth requires both. A few nights later, as I reviewed patient charts at 3 a.m., I heard the soft at dawn from my phone. It was time for Fajr, the dawn prayer. I paused, hands trembling slightly. In that sterile room of glowing monitors and restless silence, I whispered, "Bismillah." Then I prayed. Not perfectly, not loudly, but with every ounce of honesty I had left. And as I bowed, I felt that same peace I had seen in the eyes of my patients, that same surrender my grandmother had once whispered to the rain. I realized I wasn't just saying words anymore. I was being reshaped by them. That was the night I stopped running. The night I stopped asking for signs and began to listen to the one that had been calling me all along. In the next part, I'll tell you about the day I finally said the Shahada, the day my heart spoke before my tongue did, and how everything I thought I was suddenly became everything I was meant to be. For now, I leave you with peace, the kind that hums softly beneath words, beneath doubt, beneath the noise of this world. Assalamu alaikum. The day I said the Shahada didn't arrive with thunder or visions. It arrived with quiet. The kind of quiet that feels alive, like the pause before dawn, when even the air is waiting to be told what to do. I had spent weeks standing at the edge of belief, tasting it, circling it, afraid to name it. Each prayer drew me closer. Each verse pressed gently against the walls I had built inside myself. But a part of me still clung to the illusion that faith needed proof, the same way I had always demanded lab results, scans, signatures of certainty. And then one morning, that illusion broke. It was a Tuesday. Ordinary on the surface, coffee gone cold on my desk, patient charts stacked like small mountains, the hum of fluorescent light tracing the ceiling. A nurse came to tell me that one of my long-term patients, an elderly man with end-stage renal failure, was asking for me. When I entered his room, he was awake but tired, his eyes tracing the ceiling tiles as if memorizing them. He smiled weakly. "Doctor, I know I don't have much time left," he whispered. "Will you sit?" I pulled up the stool beside him. He took my hand, papery and light. "I'm not afraid," he said, "because everything returns to him." He paused, breathing shallowly. "You look like a man who's searching for that peace, too." It stunned me how accurately he saw me. I wanted to argue, to deflect, to say something clinical, but the words dissolved in my throat. He smiled again. When your heart recognizes truth, you won't need to chase it. It will come sit beside you. He passed away that night. And for the first time, instead of feeling powerless, I felt present. Death didn't look like an enemy anymore. It looked like a door, and I realized I had been knocking on it for years without knowing whose house it was. 2 days later, I stood once again outside the same blue-painted door of the masjid. This time I didn't hover. I walked in, heart racing, hands trembling. The afternoon sun spilled through stained glass and pooled softly on the carpet. A few men looked up, recognized me, and smiled with that same unspoken welcome I'd come to know. The imam approached. "Assalamu alaikum, my friend," he said warmly. I hesitated. "Wa alaikum salam," I replied, still unsure if I had the right to say it yet. He gestured for me to sit. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been holding my breath for years," I said quietly. We talked for a while about belief, about surrender, about how Islam doesn't erase questions. It teaches you where to place them. He explained the meaning of the Shahada, Ashhadu, and La ilaha illa Allah, wa Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasul Allah. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. I had heard the words before, but that day, they were not just sounds. They were a promise, one between my heart and its maker. He said gently, "When you say these words, you're not changing who you are. You're remembering who you've always been." I repeated after him, slowly. Each syllable trembled, but not from fear, from recognition. The moment ended without applause, without spectacle. Only silence, deep, full, alive. It felt like my soul had finally exhaled. I thought of all the years I had spent studying life, measuring it, labeling it. Now, for the first time, I was living it unmeasured. That evening, I walked home through the soft drizzle of early spring. The world looked newly made. The wet pavement reflected city lights like veins of gold. The air smelled of rain and jasmine. I passed a shop window and caught my reflection, the same face, the same tired eyes, but behind them, a stillness I had never seen before. I whispered almost to myself, "Alhamdulillah. All praise is due to Allah." Becoming Muslim didn't erase my struggles. There were still long nights, difficult patience, unanswered prayers. But something had changed the meaning beneath it all. What used to feel random now felt written. What used to break me now bent me toward Him. At work, I found myself speaking softer. When a patient thanked me, I'd quietly say, "It's not me who heals." And each time, I meant it a little more. One night, during Ramadan, I stayed after Taraweeh prayer, sitting alone in the masjid as others left. The lights dimmed, the air thick with the sweetness of recitation still hanging in the air. I thought about the life I had before, the noise, the hurry, the hunger for validation, and then the life I was learning, now, slower, deeper, alive, with purpose. I realized Islam hadn't asked me to become someone new. It had asked me to return to gratitude, to mercy, to presence. Sometimes people ask why I converted. I tell them I didn't. I returned. To the fitra, the natural state of knowing there's something beyond yourself. To the truth that healing begins when you stop pretending you can control every outcome. I think back to Mira, the patient I lost long ago. I think back to the nights when grief used to taste like failure. Now, I understand that each loss was a lantern leading me here. A few months after taking my Shahada, I went on a medical mission to a rural village. There was little equipment, little sleep, little comfort. But each dawn, I stood on the dusty ground, barefoot, facing the horizon as the Adhan rose from a tiny speaker. The sun broke open behind the hills like a promise kept, and I prayed not as a doctor trying to fix the world, but as a servant trusting its author. Faith doesn't make life easier. It makes it clear. Clear that every heartbeat is borrowed. Clear that every success belongs to Him. Clear that purpose isn't found in the applause of others, but in the quiet conviction of obedience. When I look back now, I see that every unanswered question, every sleepless night, every moment of collapse, they were all invitations. Invitations to remember that healing the body means nothing if the soul is starving. I never imagined I would stand in Makkah. For years, the word Hajj felt like a myth from a distant world, a pilgrimage for people more devoted, more deserving, more whole. But months after taking my Shahada, a friend in the masjid said, "Come with us for Umrah. Let your heart see what it's been praying toward." And so I went. The first glimpse of the Kaaba was not how I expected it. It wasn't shining or grand in the way human buildings try to be. It was simple, eternal, silent. Yet that silence carried the weight of every heartbeat that had ever called out, "Labbaik Allahumma labbaik." I am here, O Allah, I am here. My legs gave way. My forehead found the marble floor. And the tears, they came without warning, without reason, without shame. In that moment, I realized how small I was and how safe smallness could feel when you were held by the infinite. As I circumambulated the Kaaba, 7 times around its stillness, I thought of every life I'd tried to save, every pulse that had slipped through my fingers, every face that had asked why when I had no answer. Here, I wasn't the doctor. I wasn't the achiever. I wasn't the man hiding behind science. I was only a soul, circling its origin. Each round felt like shedding something: arrogance, doubt, fear. By the 7th, I felt lighter than I had in decades. It wasn't about being forgiven. It was about being found. The days in Makkah blurred into a rhythm of devotion. The Adhan echoed through the alleys like water finding every crack of the heart. I met people from every corner of the earth: a farmer from Sudan, a nurse from Malaysia, a teacher from Bosnia. Different languages, different lives, yet all whispering the same, Allahu Akbar. I remembered how, as a doctor, I used to believe in universality through biology, how all hearts beat the same. But here I saw a deeper universality, that all hearts kneel the same. One evening, just before Maghrib, I sat by the Kaaba watching the sky blush into gold. A young boy beside me asked softly, "Uncle, why are you crying?" I smiled through the tears. "Because I finally know where home is." He nodded in that innocent way children understand truth before adults complicate it. "Then don't forget to thank Allah," he said, and ran off to his father. His words stayed with me, not as advice, but as commandment. When I returned home, everything looked the same. The same streets, same hospital, same endless charts. But the silence between moments had changed. I began my days with Fajr and found that light entered my work before the sun did. When I walked into a patient's room, I whispered Bismillah before touching a stethoscope. Healing no longer felt like performance. It felt like prayer. I had once thought Islam would make me less of a doctor, less rational, less ambitious, but it made me more mindful, more present, more human. I realized I wasn't here to save lives. I was here to serve them. One night after surgery, a young resident asked me, "Doctor, how do you stay so calm? You never seem shaken anymore." I smiled because I finally know the difference between control and trust. She frowned a little, curious. "And what's the difference?" "Control," I said, "is believing it's all up to you. Trust is knowing it never was." Faith didn't make me immune to fear, but it gave fear somewhere to kneel. It gave every uncertainty a direction, every pain a purpose. And when grief visits, as it still does, I meet it on the prayer mat instead of the edge of despair. Sometimes, I visit my grandmother's old porch when it rains. I close my eyes, listen to the thunder, and whisper, "Subhanallah." Glory be to the one who brings storms, only to wash the dust away. I think she would have understood. She didn't know Arabic, she didn't know Islam, but she knew reverence, and now I carry her reverence inside my prayers. So here I am, a man who once built his identity on certainties, now living in the beauty of the unknown. A doctor whose most profound healing began not in an operating room, but in prostration. If I've learned anything, it's that peace doesn't arrive when life gets easier. It arrives when you finally stop resisting the hand that's been guiding you all along. As I finish this story, I remember the first time I heard the adhan drifting into the hospital cafeteria. It called to me then like an echo from a life I hadn't yet lived. Now, it calls me home 5 times a day, each call a reminder that every breath, every patient, every sunrise is mercy unfolding. To anyone listening who is searching, doubting, or quietly aching for meaning, I want you to know you are not lost. You are being led. And so, I end where I began, with a whisper that changed everything. Bismillah-ir-Rahman-ir-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might be searching too. May Allah guide us all to peace, to purpose, and to Him. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.